Coming up in this episode of In Clear Focus.
Brand storytelling is about continuing to build a story that drives customer loyalty, that people say, okay, I'm connected to the brand, I'm befriending the brand, I'm loyal to the brand that aligns to my same core values or not.
You're listening to In Clear Focus, fresh perspectives on the business of advertising, produced weekly by Big Eye. Hello, I'm your host, Adrian Tennant, Chief Strategy Officer at Big Eye, a strategy-led full-service creative agency growing brands for clients globally. Thank you for joining us. This week's episode is the second in our Big Eye Book Club series in partnership with our friends at Kogan Page Publishing. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome an award-winning storyteller and creative journalist who's also the author of our featured book this month, Brand Storytelling: Put Customers at the Heart of Your Brand Story. Miri Rodriguez is a renowned keynote speaker and international thought leader in brand storytelling, personal branding, and entrepreneurship. Currently Microsoft's senior storyteller, future of work, Miri's previous clients include Adobe, Discover, and Walmart. To discuss her book and how marketers can put customers at the heart of brand storytelling, Miri is joining us today from her home office in Pompano Beach, Florida. Miri, welcome to In Clear Focus.
Thank you so much. The weather's beautiful in my neck of the woods, and I am bragging because I used to live in Seattle. So it's beautiful in Pompano Beach, and I don't take it for granted any minute during the winter.
Well, it's lovely to have you on the podcast. Now, I know that your family is originally from Venezuela, and in your book, you describe how stories were a big part of your childhood. So how did those childhood experiences eventually lead you to a career writing for some of the biggest brands in the world?
Yeah, never would I imagine when I was riding in the car with my parents, who were both incredible storytellers in their own space. And I would watch them, I would see them do this. And it was magical to me that they would get on a stage and just move crowds with emotion, with empathy. And it was magic. It was magic for me that I would be doing that same thing, in this space of tech, in the space of digital, which is a complete different world from where I came from and what it's evolved to today. It became a core value to connect with people at the very human level. And that was something that you don't go to school for. When I graduated, I had a communications major. There was no storytelling degrees. I think there's some now, which is, I find it funny. But as jobs evolved, as digital evolved, as social media came to be, we as humans have always wanted to connect at the very core. And I think, storytelling became that thing that everybody tuned into and leaned into from a business perspective to say, this is what we were missing the whole time. We've been talking corporate jargon. We've been very formal. And now we need to connect at the human level. And I was already doing this in the social space for Microsoft, and it just became a natural evolution to my role. And next thing you know, I'm packing my bags and going to Seattle, and I was freezing.
Well, your book, Brand Storytelling, explains in practical terms how storytelling can be used to trigger human emotions, which you believe are at the heart of brand loyalty and consumer engagement. So, Miri, when did you first identify the power of stories applicable to a marketing context? Was there a particular aha moment?
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I don't want to give it all away, but I will tell a little story since I am a storyteller. I was brought in to do stories of digital transformation, and I am not an engineer. And so I thought I could do it with all of the hard skills that I had acquired at school and some of the soft skills that I had learned with social media. And I thought, anybody can write a story. I can write a story. You can write a story. And the fact was that it's not just telling a story, it's designing a story with empathy for your audience. And I had not done that. And I wrote content, which I thought was really good. But my audience did not. My audience was a very niche audience of devs and IT pros. And when I went through the exercise of going, why isn't this working? Why aren't the stories landing the way that I, intentioned? It was because they didn't want to hear from a marketer or from me. I'm not an engineer. They wanted to hear from engineers. And so the same content was applied to an engineer. I began to ghostwrite, and they tuned into the content. So there was just this one aspect of how that content landed. Even if it's really good, you have to take assessment of the empathy of your audience. How are they consuming the content, and who's telling the story is also important. And that was my aha moment. I was like, oh, that was the one thing I didn't consider. They don't want to hear from Miri. I'm a marketer to them. I'm a communicator. They want to hear from a peer engineer. And so it changed everything for me. And I used the design thinking principles to break that, to say, okay, I need to first empathize with my audience. That is the first step of design thinking.
Mm. Well, we'll get on to design thinking and how you've incorporated it into your unique approach a little later. You write that research confirms that stories can be up to 22 times more memorable than other types of information. So, can you tell us more about the neuroscience of narrative?
Absolutely. There is this brain awakening that happens when we say once upon a time. It is an innate response at the core human level that when we are, invoking a story, we tune in parts of our brain, oxytocin and these other chemicals begin to really activate because we're anticipating something that may appeal to us. When I say, hey, let me tell you this story, you immediately go in and go, okay, then I wonder what this is about versus hey, let me share with you this data point, or let me show you this picture. It really is about the anticipation. We all want to anticipate what's next. We're curious beings and we want to know what's happening. And we want to know if that appeals to us, if that's something that has to do with me. Is that going to impact me in one way or another? And that's why story works because it really levels off the content that we're trying to drive with a human emotion. And we get emotionally attached as a character to the story. I mean, think about the stories you've liked, that you've heard, the radio cast or the poetry of the songs or the films. There's something about those stories that you connect with as a character. And that enables you to really feel the emotions and really get emotionally attached to the story and see it to the end.
Well, Miri, one of the trends we've seen in our research over the past couple of years is a greater interest, particularly among younger consumers, in understanding what brands stand for, their stance on social and environmental issues, for example. How can brands harness storytelling to connect with consumers on a deeper level?
Oh, that is a great question. And I'll tell you, I continue to do a lot of research on the stance of brands and their voice in the market and how that is impacting sales and bottom line for them. I actually read an article the other day that said that accessibility and social responsibility are what the brand is about today. It's what consumers are seeing. If they don't have these elements of how they're talking about how they're socially responsible, ethically responsible, how they're being inclusive in their technologies, that is all going to drive the bottom line for them. And this newer generation, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they are very much thinking about how they're investing in their brand. When they purchase a product or a service, to them, it's not just a transaction that just drives a product or service to the end line. They are thinking, am I contributing to something bigger than myself when I invest this amount of money in the product? And so to them, it's not just about the quality of the product. It really is about the stance of that brand. So we're going to see more and more of that increasingly in the next few years. Brands are going to have to incorporate their stance, their core values, what they stand for as part of their story. And if they don't have it, they're going to miss out on the opportunity, a huge opportunity to really establish themselves in the market. And so brand storytelling is about that. It's about continuing to build a story that drives that customer loyalty, that people say, okay, I'm connected to the brand. I'm befriending the brand. I'm loyal to the brand that aligns to my same core values or not. I mean, we've seen that actually impact negatively when brands have decided to stay quiet with a social issue or say nothing against something that people expect them to say. So they are being seen as an entity and a voice, and they should have one, and they should talk about their stance.
Well, in brand storytelling, you also describe your approach to prototyping stories based on human centered design principles. So, Miri, what led you to apply design thinking to storytelling?
Well, basically, I failed. I failed to do the job. Again, thinking there's a lot of ego involved when you can write a story and you're like, hey, I can do this. Again, it was this very niche audience that I was hoping to reach and I was not reaching them. And for me, I had to break out of what I was doing before. And I think storytelling teaches us if we really think about storytelling and story designing, we got to move away from the conventional idea of just telling a story or just writing something that may work or not. It is an empathetic approach to your audience. It is a design user experience. You have to think of the story as a persona. Actually, the persona is the relationship that the story has with the reader, the consumer. All of us have a unique story, a relationship with whatever we consume. If you read a book and I read the same book, we're going to have different reactions and learn different things from that book, even though it's the same content. So for me, I had to really think, well, no longer do I approach this as I have my story, it's fully baked and it's going to be successful. It's the other approach of I'm a lifelong learner and I'm failing massively. So I'm going to just prototype things. I'm going to use the design thinking approach, which is 5 steps, as I mentioned before. And the prototyping piece is where you just ideate some stories that you think might resonate with your audience, and then you test them and see how they're going to react. And if you're writing a story that is emotionally connected, you're going to get that reaction and you're going to start seeing that respond. And I started seeing that. And I was like, oh, wait, this is working. And so more and more I started to apply. It's almost like the audience is guiding you to tell you, okay, this is what we like. This is what we want you to go with the story. And the story has a life of its own, and you let it flourish and you let it, you let its wings, take over and fly.
From a practical standpoint, how do you do that prototyping? I mean, if it were a UX project, you would probably do some kind of usability testing. How does it work with a story?
Yeah, same. So you have to think of the story as a product, because it is. And so from a usability perspective, when you prototype it with 2 benchmark approach. So the first one is it's readership, it's consumption. It's the first touch point of they consume the content. Are they going to share it, and are they going to react? So engagement is a big benchmarking when you test it. It's going to happen organically. You don't have to put media behind it. If you really believe that the story will actually do its job, and you have to create a mission for it, as you do with any product. Who is my audience? Who am I targeting here? What do I want them to know and feel when they come in touch with the story? And what is the takeaway that I want them to have? And so you create a mission for the story. Every story should have its own mission. And for brand storytelling, there's this long narrative that the brand has that is consistent, but there's also smaller stories that are helping the narrative come to fruition and remind the consumers why we exist and what's happening and how we are evolving. So there's a consistent practice. It never ends.
You write that only brands that spend a considerable amount of time researching to truly understand which universal truth appeals best to their audience will remain competitive. Okay, Miri, could you unpack that for us? What are universal truths in this context?
Yes, I call universal truths that emotion that you will feel when you come in contact with the story. And that is what the brand intended to do. A universal truth is if I tell you a story of something that happened to me and you've never experienced anything like it, but let's say it's a story about embarrassment. I usually use that as an example, and because I've been embarrassed a lot in my life. So I have a lot of those. But if I tell that story, I usually tell a story about a wardrobe malfunction that happened to me on my first day of my job. I was 16, and people are like cringe, they're like, oh no, I can't believe that happened to you. And I say, this probably never happened to you, but you can, at that moment, I brought you to my space and my place. You were able to relate to me at the very core human level, even if that's never happened to you. That's what story does. And so the universal truth is a feeling that all of us at the human level feel. It's emotions that we all have and we can appeal to when telling a story. These are stories of fear. These are stories of inspiration. These are stories of love. These are stories of embarrassment. And we all have felt some of that. And so all of that. And so when we are able to successfully connect with another human who's consuming the story at that moment in that emotion, that's a universal truth. At Microsoft, for example, our brand mission is to empower every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Our universal truth is empowerment, because that's the feeling. I mean, you know what it feels like to be empowered or not, but I don't have to explain it. It's universal. And so that's the thing. That's the magic of a good story versus an inconsequential story. Stories are stories, and some of them are good, some of them are not. And what I think makes a story good is that universal truth. So brands that are going to really think about designing a story that connects that universal truth at the human level connection, at the emotional level, with their consumers, with their audiences, will win in the market. I'll give you an example. We're now telling stories about engagement at the employee level. That's a thing right now with hybrid work, the future of work, we're calling it. And that's my remit today. And we have to switch the conversation from employee productivity to employee engagement. That word changes everything, because in productivity, when I read productivity, I'm like, oh, they just want me to be more productive. They want me to be a machine. But if I hear my employees saying, hey, I want you to engage, now there's a loyalty, there's an exchange of emotion that I want, the brand is talking to me. So that changes everything, that changes the story. So it's really that empathy that you have with your audience to say, what do we want them to feel when they read this, when they consume?
Let's take a short break. We'll be right back after these messages.
I'm Seth Segura, VP and Creative Director at Big Eye. Every week, In Clear Focus addresses topics that impact our work as creative professionals. At Big Eye, we always put audiences first. For every engagement, we commit to really understanding our clients' prospects and customers. Through our own primary research, we capture valuable data about people's attitudes, behaviors, and motivations. These insights inform our strategy and guide our creative briefs. Clients see them brought to life in inspiring, imaginative, brand building, and persuasive activation campaigns. If you'd like to put Big Eye's audience-focused creative communications to work for your brand, please contact us. Email info@bigeyeagency.com. Big Eye, reaching the right people in the right place at the right time.
Each month, in partnership with our friends at Kogan Page, the Big Eye Book Club features interviews with authors who are experts in specific areas of marketing. February's featured book is Brand Storytelling: Put Customers at the Heart of Your Brand Story by Miri Rodriguez. In Clear Focus listeners can save 20% on a print or electronic version of the book with exclusive promo code BIGEYE20. That's BIGEYE20. This code is valid for all products and pre-orders and applies to Kogan Page's free ebook offer. To order your copy of Brand Storytelling, go to koganpage.com. Welcome back. I'm talking with Miri Rodriguez, the author of this month's Big Eye Book Club selection, Brand Storytelling: Put Customers at the Heart of Your Brand Story. One of my favourite features of brand storytelling is the series of magic tricks. I'm curious what prompted you to incorporate them into the book.
Yeah, so actually nobody's asked me that question. This is really great. I like this. I ran out of content. I was writing for so long. And, those of you who've ever written a book will know that it comes to the point where you just have writer's block. And that was my point. I had writer's block and I just didn't know where to go next. I was writing the book chapter by chapter instead of just by blocks. And typically the publisher will say, hey, just write free form and then we'll kind of put them into chapters. I was like, no, I want to write each chapter. I want to feel the sequence of what I'm saying. And so at the point of magic tricks, I realized that I'd been speaking about the foundational pieces and elements of story. And then I was like, wait, we got to add the magic tricks. We got to understand what makes a story actually magical. And I went back to my parents and how I thought that was magical. And so I envisioned their storytelling and I really incorporated what I had learned from them practically, looking at what they do. And it's adding to the elements of visual. It's thinking about font and color. It's the details of a story that dress up the arc, that change the scope of a story. It can really give it a different life form, honestly. And so I was actually sitting in my couch, my dog next to me, bored and thinking what was next. And I had that vision. I was like, oh, that's it. It's magic tricks. It's like how to take this and make it magical for your audience. And that's where that came from.
Well, I love a magic trick. So, Miri, could you describe one effect to us and then share the secret?
Yeah. So I'll share color. I think color is a good one because visual elements really change the tone of how you're telling the story. And I actually want to appeal to color from many different perspectives because storytelling is not just a written form. That's just a form factor. It's an asset. You can tell a story from many different ways. Of course, you can look at a picture and that's a story. So really, there's many different ways that you deliver that story to your audience. Color has an inclusion factor that I think enables the story to change how we consume it. And if you add a color or even a tone to a voice that somebody's telling the story, narrating the story, it changes that perspective. And so color it's an element, a magic trick that I have seen work. We used to have a guy come from Disney to Microsoft to teach us how the narrative at Disney World, actually, they change the sceneries just by adding and changing colors alone. It actually awakens the brain differently as well. So there's this powerful tool that we have in color that enables us to really dress up the story differently and change the outcome of how we want the reactions to be. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that. A lot of people, when you say storytelling, they'll think of a book or they'll think of a blog, and that's just one form. If you can actually today in the digital world leverage vision and leverage visual elements and leverage color, by all means do it. When you look at your brand logo, can you change it? Should you change it today? Maybe that's something that's part of your brand story. We've seen a lot of corporations do that. Maybe add another color, change the branding it is something that we are now looking into more and more as to the relationship that we're having. Again, if you think of a brand that you love, it probably has a great logo and a great color. It's part of that, and it's part of that psychology. So color is something to consider bigger and better as part of your brand story. It is not separate from it. It is part of the story.
Miri, I'm curious about your writing process. Are you most productive in a quiet space, or do you prefer a coffee shop?
Oh, I need a quiet space. I actually get very distracted in coffee shops. My writing process begins with giving myself a lot of white space. I first type the ideas and the themes and the topics that I'm going to cover. And then I give myself a pause. And because my thoughts don't run immediately, I'm like, okay, I know I want to write about this. I put it down. And then I actually wake up at like 2 in the morning and 4 in the morning. And that's when my best time starts because everybody's quiet. And I know that I have all the time. So when I wake up, I'm writing and it's flowing. And I typically will write a whole 1,600 word blog in maybe 4 hours. And if I wake up at 2 in the morning. So clearly a first draft, but I do flow very nicely. I need peace and quiet.
I've noticed that you also hang out in the social audio app Clubhouse, talking about all things brand storytelling. What's the appeal of Clubhouse?
Clubhouse has been a great platform to connect with people who are truly interested in learning and asking questions real time. And I think the beauty of that is you enter a room and you're just surrounded by people from all over the place and in one space, and it's just a very powerful community based platform as opposed to other social media. It's one to many, but you have to type back or you have to reply or maybe get into a direct message approach. This one really enables you to be live, real time. You feel the energy of people getting curious about what you do and how you do it and learning from each other. And it's been very empowering for me to teach techniques because a lot of brands, they don't know how to take concepts to practical. Hey, how do I apply this? I get a lot of questions around, I hear this, Miri, I get the theory. How do I just start tomorrow? How do I present a business plan to my leaders tomorrow? So I get a lot of those questions of like, hey, let's start right away. And that really enables me the opportunity to offer that free advice that they're looking for. And it's just community building, which I love. I love people and I love connecting with people. So.
If brand marketers want to adopt brand storytelling, what's the best way for them to get started?
What I'm hearing from a lot of brands that I have come in contact with, both big and small, is how do I get leadership to buy in? It's almost where we were with social media 15 years ago, where we had to explain social media to our executives and ask them to let us create a Twitter profile or Facebook page. So it's this idea of buying again into storytelling. And in my experience, the best way to do that is to come in as an expert. You are the professional in the company. You are the marketer. You know your audience, hopefully. You've done the homework. Come in with a business plan and propose a pilot and say, hey, this is an approach that everybody's talking about, brand storytelling or storytelling. It's in everybody's top of mind today, so it's not foreign to anybody. And say, hey, I want to create this pilot where we can test these stories differently than we have before as a marketing approach. So you can do a campaign or you can do a 3 to 6 month strategy with an integrated marketing and communications campaign, not necessarily an ad, but a long-standing campaign, and say, I want to try this for the next 6 months. And it's going to work. And so when it does, the leadership will buy in. You don't have to spend a lot of money or funds on that either. That's where the prototyping piece comes in, actually. It's a low cost, low effort. I did it myself. There was no money. We have no money. So I really had to scramble to think about how our content was going to get picked up. And when you have a good story, you can even pitch it to PR because PR needs good stories. So even within a company, you can pitch it to different places and organizations within your own company with different teams, and they can pick it up as well. So we pitch our own story internally because Microsoft is that big. And, Windows picks it up or Office picks it up, and then it's on their channels as well, and it gives it visibility. So there's so many ways that you can creatively think about stories that will appeal to so many people starting from the top. So if it's an enterprise-led story, enterprise leaders to enterprise leaders, how can you take that story and bring it down to a level of customers and users? How can you bring it to marketing? How can you pitch it to all these other places? And there's so many things you can do with a story. It's so good.
In the book, you generously provide several practical story frameworks and structures that marketers can adapt to their own needs. So, for anyone entirely new to brand storytelling, which do you typically recommend?
I recommend that they start with the Reimagined integrated marketing and communications plan, because we all know what that looks like. We are part of communications and marketing, and we have been, if you're in the marketing field, you have touched into that space, even if you haven't directly been in the comms space, for example. So we understand this plan of integrating both internal communications and marketing, external and marketing as well, and anything that relates to market advocacy. So it's an easy way to really incorporate brand storytelling and say, okay, what is our brand narrative and how are we going to start delivering stories that are part of our plan, of our communications internally? Who is going to tell it from an executive perspective and really drive this kind of cross-functional, cross-pollination of all the teams that touch communications and marketing, and really appeal to this one narrative that everybody's going to, have a shared perspective in. And from there, you can create so many others. And I really recommend that you have shared priorities. These teams need to come together to say, okay, this is our mission together as marketing and comms and executive comms and all anything in between. And we're going to align to this one mission of telling this narrative on behalf of the brand. And it's going to look different because all of the verticals look different, and it should. But in the end, everybody should tie back to that universal truth. So it looks cohesive, it looks coherent. And the consumer who doesn't know, there's so many people in different places, to them, it makes sense, right? The communication makes sense because they're always being reminded of the narrative in the background. So it's a really great approach to start creating a reimagined integrated marketing and communications plan.
In brand storytelling, you have a section that looks to the future in which you address artificial intelligence, machine learning, and of course, automation. So I'm curious, have you trialed any of the AI-assisted GPT-3 based writing tools that have become available since your book was first published?
Oh, wow. I'm so impressed by that question. The answer is yes. And I have to say, so yeah, I mean, I've gotten to try some really cool technology. Obviously, being at Microsoft, we're very privileged in being in this space. I've just been in contact with just incredible things that I'm just in awe of when I come in touch with this technology. So very much looking forward to this hitting the market for everyone to see. I have to say, my first impression of these technologies is that I am inept, but I also love the fact, and I did mention this in the book, this integration of AI is, if we do it right as humans, we will be able to really enable and empower these technologies to help us become better humans, as opposed to letting them take away our humanity. I want to still write. I enjoy it. And I think that people, when they read your content, that's that connection, that intention, that human connection is there. So there's got to be a balance where we as humans will create when we come in contact with technologies that assist us in the process, where it doesn't feel so robotic, that is still, there's a human connection and people can still connect at the heart, which is the point of story. And so it's a little bit scary, how that will all turn out. But I also think it's an incredibly exciting space that we'll be talking about very soon. Metaverse is another one, the phygital space, that integration of physical and digital. It's all coming to fruition very soon. I really do believe, and I do say this in the book, that our opportunity here is that we will encode empathy into the technology. And so instead of the robots making us more robotic, we'll let the robots be robots and we'll be continuing doing human things, which I think it's very powerful.
I love that. So Miri, do you have any favorite tools, physical or digital, that you find especially helpful to boost your own creativity?
Yeah, a good old notepad. This is me all day long. There's actually a psychological process when you take notes down, written on paper with pen and paper. I read about that. The process of that versus actually typing, it's different. The brain processes the wording and the sequence differently. And so for me, I love it. I love writing and I love taking notes of everything. And I find all kinds of notes everywhere that I've written to myself. And then I laugh. I'm like, what was this about? And I remember. But to me, that physical interaction reminds me of my humanity. I get tired from writing, right? My hands hurt. And I think that's important for me to feel that. It's important for me to, again, not be so robotic. And I think there's this balance between being efficient and being human, being in my best human condition, I'll call it that. And so I like that. I like to feel that, my hand is tired from writing. I'll take a break. I'll go take a tea and then come back and write some more. So the physical aspect for me is really important. I actually write notes before I move to technology. Yeah, so I think technology is this combination of great things, but also there's a sacredness that there is to an author into the writing process.
Miri, if In Clear Focus listeners would like to learn more about you and your work or your book, Brand Storytelling, where can they find you?
So many places. And please connect with me where you feel best connected. So I do have a website. It's MiriRod, MIRIROD.com. So you can find out more about me and the book there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Miri Rodriguez, and on Twitter and Instagram at MiriRod. And I connect on all of them. I know it's crazy, but I do take time to answer every question and every person who wants to connect with me. So if you have a question or anything related to brand storytelling, I'm here. I would love to help.
And In Clear Focus listeners receive a 20% discount of Brand Storytelling and other books published by Kogan Page when you order online at koganpage.com. Use the special discount code BIGEYE20, that's BIGEYE20 at checkout. Miri, thank you very much for being our guest this week on In Clear Focus.
Thank you so much, Adrian. I had a great time talking to you. You are an amazing host and you've asked really great questions. Thank you so much. They were great.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks to my guest, Miri Rodriguez, the author of this month's Big Eye Book Club selection, Brand Storytelling. You'll find a transcript with links to the resources we discussed today on the In Clear Focus page at bigeyeagency.com under Insights. Just select podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider following us wherever you listen to podcasts and contributing a rating or a review. Thank you for listening to In Clear Focus, produced by Big Eye. I've been your host, Adrian Tennant. Until next week, goodbye.